Thanks for that kind introduction. It's truly an honor to be here at the Museum of Chinese in America, an institution that has done so much to increase public understanding of not only the Chinese immigrant experience in the United States, but also of Asian Americans and the Asian diaspora more generally. I'm particularly, I'm an editor at the New York Times, and I mostly traffic in words and do careful editing. I'm very attentive, I try to be, to nuances of word selection, diction, syntax, but also meaning. But I'm also very, very aware of the acute and enduring power, thank you very much, of images. And what was most striking to me in looking at these two books is the immense visual array of what's been amassed here, which is really something quite distinctive. I don't think in any of the books that I've read about Arab Americans, about Asian Americans, have I seen such a visually rich and frankly disturbing collection of images. So I think that's very impressive. I'm going to very briefly introduce, because their biographies are in the program, our three speakers this evening, and then they'll each proceed to do to give a brief presentation about why they decided to write their book, or in the case, or collect their documents, these artifacts. And then we'll have some moderated Q&A from me, and then most excitingly, some questions, I hope, from you, the audience. So thank you. To my immediate right is John Tchen, who often goes by Jack, if I'm not mistaken. He's a historian, curator, and writer, very significantly a founder of this museum, which was previously the Chinatown Historical Society, if I'm not mistaken.
New York Chinatown History Project. But
my apologies.
It's hard to remember.
Yes. And I remember when it was down on
East Broadway, and then
yeah.
And then in the school building.
Yeah, a very rich history of now almost 35 years. He is also the founding director of the Asian Pacific American Studies Program and Institute at NYU, and a founding faculty member of the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis. Jack has just completed a critical archival study of images, excerpts, and essays, Yellow Peril, the subject of the discussion this evening. He's also the senior historian for an upcoming exhibition on the Chinese exclusion period for the New York Historical Society. And his next book, Chinaman, Exclusion, The American Promise, will be published alongside the exhibition. To Jack's right is Dylan Yeats, a doctoral candidate in history at NYU. He specializes in United States history with a focus on the political demonology and structures of authority. He writes and teaches about American politics, Asian American history, and Islamophobia. He's also a public historian, a trained archivist, and a sightseeing guide who is licensed to give tours in New York City. I'd like to take one sometime.
All right.
Finally, at the end of the table is Dr. Jack Shaheen. His lectures and writings have focused on negative images and stereotypes of Asians, blacks, and other minorities or disadvantaged groups in the world. He is a former CBS News consultant on Middle Eastern affairs, has been a professional film consultant on very, very popular hits like Syriana and Three Kings, which I'd like to learn more about. And he's received several awards for his contributions to cultural understanding. And his new book, A is for Arab, Archiving Stereotypes in U.S. Popular Culture, draws from a trove of objects and materials from a collection that he has donated and deposited at New York University. This is a very, very special collection of more than 4,000 images, including motion pictures, cartoons, and television programs, as well as toys and games featuring anti-Arab and anti-Muslim depictions. So we're going to actually start with Jack Shaheen, and then we will move to Jack Tchen and Dylan Yeats. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that very gracious introduction. I'm extremely pleased to return to this museum. I was here right after it opened a few years ago and was impressed with the commonalities that exist within Asian Americans and Arab Americans, and some of the stereotypes that they've had to endure over all these years. And I want to compliment my dear friends and colleagues, Dylan Yeats and Jack Tchen, on their new book, Yellow Peril, which is a brilliant book. I couldn't put it down. Professor Tchen offered to buy me a latte if I plugged the book tonight, so I'll take him up on it as soon as the session has ended. But seriously, the A is for Arab book is based on 4 decades of work, whereby I, along with my dear wife Bernice, went about collecting images of Arabs in American popular culture. More than 2,000 films and television shows, hundreds of comic books, toys and games, cartoons, and it all began innocently, actually. I never intended to look at this particular topic. I don't look Arab, you know, I have green eyes, and Shaheen sounds Irish. So it was sort of nothing that really appealed to me until one day. I was upstairs, it was in the mid-70s, and my children came running up the steps saying, "Daddy, Daddy, they've got bad Arabs on." And I really didn't know quite what to do, except I went downstairs, and there on the television set we saw cartoons like Porky Pig, Popeye, Bugs Bunny, trouncing all these Arabs. And I thought, well, isn't this interesting? Cartoons vilifying Arabs in the mid-70s. So I asked our children, Michael and Michelle, if they would be so kind and document all of these images for their dear father. So on Saturday morning, I'd be having coffee with my wife, and I'd hear, "Daddy, Daddy," and I'd run downstairs, because at the time I didn't have a VCR, and I would start writing frantically about these cartoons. Well, today at the Tenement Library at NYU, you'll find literally dozens of children's cartoons which show the vilification of Arabs with Porky Pig, Bugs Bunny. I brought with me, I couldn't resist, one of the main offenders was Disney. And I just brought with me one visual. This is an old Disney 1947 cartoon called Crazy with the Heat, where you have the Arab with the scimitar trying to do away with Donald Duck and Goofy. And to date, my next book, if I have time to finish it, will do with the cartoon Arab, because I've documented more than 1,000 children's cartoons that in one way or another show the Arab as the evil enemy other. What's interesting about tonight is that this is not a session about one group of people or another. It's a session about the vilification of a people, of any group of people, and what goes into that vilification process. The sins of omission and commission. How you dehumanize a people by excluding their humanity, be they Asian or Arab. How you show only the negative attributes. You take a grain of sand, and in that grain of sand you take out all of the sort of like pieces that don't fit, and you say these pieces represent a people, and you turn it into a sandstorm, so that when you look at images of Arabs, you know, you have the terrorist, you have the sheikh, you have the boisterous bargainer, you have the women who are portrayed as being submissive. The politicians love to pick up on that, you know. Anthony Weiner's wife, Huma Abedin, I'm not quite sure. Yes, I think Rush Limbaugh, someone said, of course, you know, he's married to a Muslim, no wonder he gets away with all these things. Muslim women are submissive. And I thought to myself, really, it's new to me. And you could look at, you know, the role of Asian women. They're submissive, boisterous belly dancers, and sexual images, and so forth. So there are many commonalities, which I hope we'll get into during this discussion. And the other thing that I've always talked about with my students and here at NYU, and I must say I'm deeply grateful to NYU, Professor Tchen, and the people at the Kevorkian Center for accepting my collection and utilizing it and sharing it with students and faculty. It's a wonderful resource material. But getting back to the commonalities and the differences, when you vilify a people, innocents die. You compare Saddam Hussein to Hitler, it makes it that much easier to go to war in Iraq. Over and over again, you repeat the same images of sameness, the sins of omission and commission. And so you dehumanize a people primarily by excluding family. In other words, an Asian or an Arab couple cannot be happily married. They can't have children. They can't go out on a picnic, okay? Because if you do that, if you see a family together, you know, going to McDonald's and having French fries, all of a sudden they become like us.